On the football field, the goalposts only move if there's a strong wind. It would seem in the CFP committee room, the strong winds from the ACC and the SEC have swirled together and kept Notre Dame out of the 2025 college football playoff field. The team that had this week, all week long, the third best Vegas odds to run the table and win the national championship will not play for a national championship. I thought Notre Dame would be in the way the weekend unfolded. I thought that it would flip-flop places with Alabama, that Alabama would be the 10, that would be the buffer. Duke winning the ACC championship was a disaster scenario for Notre Dame, and the Fighting Irish are left out of the playoffs. Barely 11 months, or not even 11 months, since nearly winning the national championship. I'm John Brice, joined by Drew Mentock, bringing you another Irish Illustrated Overtime, pretty somber one, given the tenor of this season and the placement that Notre Dame had held in the rankings. Drew, welcome in. Your initial thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think that they definitely wanted an ACC team in. They weren't going to leave out all the any of the Power Four teams, and they decided to make that decision. I don't really understand the logic of how BYU, which was actually competitive for most of the game, or for the first half, they scored first, and it was 13-7 at half, and they need to drop, but you don't need to drop Alabama when they were. I mean, that game felt like it was over after the first quarter, and they were never competitive. So I don't really know how you justify those two things, but it sounds like they did the thing that they probably felt was the least controversial for them. And it's really hard I mean, we listened to Hunter Yurchek on ESPN. He can say all the things he might feel like he's supposed to, but I do think it's fair to not really take him at his word on those things, because they really seem to orchestrate this potential scenario over the last 2 weeks. And I totally get it if you're a Notre Dame fan and you're really frustrated right now.
Yeah, exactly that, Drew. I think it has been an orchestration. They were setting it up to where if every crazy scenario unfolded, and as I've said consistently, again, I thought Notre Dame would get into the field, especially after Alabama was blown out. But as I've said consistently, if 11 spots were secured and a 12th came down to a side-by-side of Notre Dame and Miami, it would be at that point in time the committee would put Miami in over Notre Dame, particularly with no other representative from the ACC. Somebody was texting me over the weekend saying, I don't see any way that Notre Dame can be left out. They're arguably the biggest brand in football. And I said, that's a very valid point, but the ACC is 17 brands. It's 17 schools. And so I think that's why ultimately that the ACC, this was orchestrated to allow Miami to get in. And look, Miami beat Notre Dame on the field head to head. There's no disputing that. It was this season. And the scenario I've said that had it been a year ago and Notre Dame ran the table to 11-1 and Texas A&M ran the table to 11-1, anyone that had tried to discount Notre Dame's win at Texas A&M would have been naysayed. And I think that's ultimately what happened here. But again, this is incredible disappointment, because every metric showed not only that Notre Dame should be in the field, but that it would be one of the better teams in the field. And you can look at Twitter, or you can look at Joy Galloway on ESPN criticizing the committee for flip-flopping and moving Notre Dame out of the field. You heard Nick Saban say he didn't have the answer, but he felt that Notre Dame should be in the field. I don't know anyone who believes that Notre Dame shouldn't be in the field, but the committee did not put Notre Dame into the field, Drew.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, the team that feels like I'm out of the non-automatic qualifiers, like Oklahoma, they kept them up where they were. Like, they probably had opportunities to move them back weeks ago, but it is, I mean, Notre Dame debuted at 10 in the initial rankings and then won its final 4 games by, I think, 38.3 points and on average. And then they drop 1 spot by the end of the rankings after like it is pretty. I get why they did this, and I understand like the head-to-head and why the games have to matter. But yeah, just the way they went about it, and they didn't have to have Miami jump Utah a few weeks ago when Utah didn't lose. I understand they looked poorly, but they kind of started creating this scenario. So yeah, I agree. I mean, FPI has Notre Dame at number 3. The Sagarin rating has Notre Dame at number 3 nationally. Like, you are leaving out one of the potential best teams in college football. And I mean, they said it on the broadcast too for ESPN. Like, I think with NIL and the now that talent's been more diluted across the field, like it does make more sense to expand the field because you are put yourself in a scenario that one of the best teams in college football is left out of the playoff, which is supposed to determine who's the national champion. And it does feel unjust, even if I understand the resume arguments for that team not to be in.
And we should note, and wrote about this on Friday after his appearance on the Pat McAfee show, that Pete Bavacqua did divulge that talks are progressing very positively toward expanding the field. Pete said he wasn't sure if that would be by 2026, but he believed no later than 2027. I would imagine as they convene next month around the national championship game in Florida, that they being the CFP board of directors, of which Pete is a part, along with reps of the ACC, Big 10, Big 12, SEC, Mountain West, Sun Belt, rejuvenated two-pack, Pac-12, and maybe one other league. But as they all meet, I would say that today's results really prompt a massive sense of urgency to get it to 16 to try and get the field right next year. I thought that last year, I didn't necessarily agree with all the seedings a year ago, but I thought that last year the committee got the field exactly right. I don't get that feeling today. I don't get the feeling that the committee didn't apply circuitous logic, if not curated logic, to get to this final 12. Because again, you make the point. BYU led 7-0 and marched down the field and scored early, was driving again multiple times, was driving on the opening possession of the second half when it was a 13-7 game, and then had the turnover bug strike, and I think had 3 of their 4 turnovers in the second half, if not all 4 of their turnovers in the second half. So BYU drops. Alabama was virtually non-competitive against Georgia. Georgia had a 21-0 lead 47 minutes into the game, finishes off a 28-7 win. Alabama had -3 net rushing yards. Alabama only had 209 total yards of offense and 11 first downs. I understand that you'd set the precedent to protect losers of conference championship games who were in the field going into that weekend, but you never said you protect them to the extent that they get blown out and they don't move. Drew, what is your? I think your read is probably the same as mine on that situation, but do you have any other additional thoughts there? And as we note that Hunter Yurachek saying on the ESPN broadcast that the ACC being left out was never a factor, I'll never believe that.
I had the same thought. I was like, he's going to answer this that way. If he says anything otherwise, there would be just a giant uproar. So what else is he going to say? And to your point, so much of the narrative for Notre Dame was that they're just like this most complete team, like for the first few weeks from the committee. And they really looked at that and valued that. And that's even why they were ranked ahead of Alabama at certain points, because Alabama can't rush the ball. And then I don't know if you saw, there was a graphic from the college football Reddit where they showed conference championship weekend rushing statistics from the SEC, and Georgia ranked first with like 141 yards. Every other team ranked tied for second with 0, and then Alabama was at -3. Like, that's just how bad of that performance is. So when you make such an effort to include a team that has such a significant deficiency that can be taken away throughout the field, and leaving out a team that doesn't have any of those deficiencies, Notre Dame's among the top 10 in a lot of the most important statistics for rushing offense, defense, passing offense, defense. Like, I feel like that has to matter too. So there's just a lot of things that point to why I get, again, I know it has to come down to resume, but like, you want the best teams in the field and the teams that could potentially win it. And they did a lot of justification to exclude one of those teams.
Yeah, and to further drive home how terrible, absolutely terrible, that Alabama was Saturday evening inside Mercedes-Benz Stadium. The Crimson Tide offense was only on the field for 23 minutes in that game. They only could stay on the field against that Georgia defense for 23 minutes. I mean, that is the definition of non-competitive. Again, you protect Alabama, you do not reward them. And I think by keeping them the placeholder at number 9, you absolutely rewarded Alabama for getting blown out, and you punish Notre Dame when Notre Dame shouldn't have dropped behind Alabama a week ago, period. after leading Stanford 42-6 through three quarters. The same Stanford team that beat Florida State, that beat Alabama, mind you. And I know we can play 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon or 6 degrees of Nick Saban, whatever you want to call the college version of that game. But the fact is, as you've alluded to, Drew, they set up this scenario last week when they dropped Alabama for really no reason on Tuesday, or excuse me, when they dropped Notre Dame for really no reason Tuesday night, and used some of the worst logic. As much as I disagree with pretty much everything Hunter Yurachek said today, I couldn't disagree more with them trying to hold Alabama up as winning some great game against an Auburn team that had fired its coach, that set a record. Auburn set a program record for futility this year on offense for fewest points in the modern era against SEC foes or power conference foes. They were so terrible on offense. And they held that up as Alabama dominating that game because they took a 17-0 lead, while never mentioning that Alabama had to score a touchdown inside the final 4 minutes and force a turnover inside the final minute to avoid potentially losing that game in overtime losing that game in regulation or going into overtime. And so, again, I don't understand that logic. But now this raises major questions for Notre Dame moving forward, Drew. And when we get to that talking point, or as we arrive there now at that talking point, just what are some of the thoughts that come to mind to you? I think we almost certainly have seen the ends of Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price's playing careers in Notre Dame. I don't see any reason why guys ranked 2 of the top 3 running backs per Mel Kiper for the upcoming NFL draft will play in a Pop-Tart Bowl or a Pastry Bowl or a Cheez-Its Bowl or any of those other options out there.
Matt Miller also has them as the top 2 running backs in this class too, and Jeremiah Love is his number 1 overall player, at least in terms of talent. Not that he'll go that high because he's a running back, but I agree, especially with Love getting injured, kind of off of a cheap shot against Stanford. Like, there's no telling, like, teams are going to still do that even in a bowl game that means less. So there's no reason for him to do that. I think that, again, that's disappointing. Like, maybe the greatest running back in Notre Dame history. Like, you should have thought you might have one more game with him, and you're not going to get to see him on the field anymore in another competitive game. And again, last year too, I mean, he had that great run against Indiana, and then the really tough run against Penn State. But obviously he was significantly hobbled with a knee injury last year too. So you're missing out on another chance to maybe get some postseason redemption from him, where he might have a bruised rib, but he's mostly healthy. And yeah, same with Price. He's dealt with an Achilles injury before. He's, been banged up. He's had some other issues. Like, if he's perceived that highly at this point, there's no reason to come back in a game that means less. Not that Notre Dame won't prepare just as hard, but could only hurt your draft stock for some reason or another. And I mean, the second running back off the board, if you can go in the second round, I mean, that's a significant payday. Whereas if you drop to the 3rd or 4th, like the amount of money you might get off the bat is pretty diminished.
Yeah, and to be fair, I mean, if you're the number 2 or number 3 running back on the board right now, I expect Jadarian Price will interview incredibly well. I think he'll test incredibly well at pro day or individual workouts, what have you. And we see the NFL sometimes when one team makes a bold move at any position, other teams follow suit. So with where Jadarian Price is projected right now or graded by the draft experts, I don't think it's outside the realm of possibility he sneaks into the back of the first round of the draft, which again is another significant factor. We saw a couple of years ago in the Sun Bowl, Sam Hartman and some others not play in that game. So I think that the precedent has been established. What you won't see is Notre Dame declining to go to a bowl the way that Kansas State did several days ago. News we broke at FootballScoop, and the way that now Iowa State also has elected not to do. Now, those programs had coaching changes, but those programs also were slapped with $500,000 fines apiece this morning by the Big 12 Conference, trying to send a message. But Kansas State left it up to a player vote, and the players voted, we don't want to do this. We don't know who's coaching us. We're losing all of our coaches. This is blindsiding to us. And so very interesting dynamic that we'll continue to monitor throughout college football, because it's going to put some more teams in with losing records. I do know that Notre Dame had strongly expected to be in the field. They had made the remainder of their calendar for the month of December very much tailored to being in the playoff field and tailored to making an advanced run in the playoff field. Beyond that, I know people, when they get over the angst, the understandable angst of Notre Dame not being in the field, some people will want to know where they're going to go for a bowl. And the three that I've heard the most discussion about, the Pop-Tarts Bowl, the Gator Bowl, and the Holiday Bowl. So I would really expect Notre Dame to land in one of those three bowls, and that's also based on conversations with people on campus. But again, they did not expect to be in this scenario. Drew, put the headset on for a minute, and what do you think Marcus Freeman's message is to his team right now? They were gathered in the Goog to watch the selection show, and obviously there's just unexpected, unreal disappointment, and also, again, the dawning realization that I'm sure for multiple players, their Notre Dame careers are over.
I think it's going to be like, use this as motivation for whatever they have left, wherever they go. I think he's gonna. I know people are so upset, including in this chat, that they feel like Notre Dame should boycott, but I think he's going to flip that. Like, let's so angry. Let's prove we belonged in this field. Let's continue to show, like, maybe we get BYU, who is right up there as a potential playoff team and could have been ranked even higher if you look at some of the advanced metrics. So let's go take it to them, even if we don't have Jeremiah Love or Jadarian Price. So I think he's going to really try and motivate them. And a bowl game is significant for Notre Dame in terms of even next year too. Like, those are extra practices that younger guys get. Like, that's a good time to get freshmen who don't really play more reps and develop other guys too. So I think they're going to still put their best foot forward. I know this is super disappointing, but they feel like they belong. It's not like some other unjust thing happened where, I don't know, CJ Carr got hurt and that's why they knocked them out or anything. Like, they still feel like they're that team and they're going to want to go prove that.
Some good comments there from John Tucker and Rob M. About the situation. I do want to point out, I thought Pete Bavacqua was very effective in his messaging on Friday to make it about Alabama and Notre Dame. I thought that Notre Dame missed a real talking point over the past week, particularly as it pertained to championship weekend and talking about, well, this is an additional opportunity that they earned. We don't want to set the precedent of punishing them by playing a 13th game. Well, here's what should have been pointed out. Notre Dame had already played 12 real games, and none of those other teams had played 12 real games over the course of this season. Notre Dame played 10 power conference opponents. It played Boise State, a reigning CFP participant, and it played Navy that won 10 games last year and 9 games this year. So I think Notre Dame should have beaten the drum a little bit louder that it didn't play any money games. It didn't play an FCS team like Eastern Illinois or Bethune-Cookman, which is who Miami got to play the week after beating Notre Dame. It didn't play Austin Peay or Mercer or Samford, as Texas A&M did very late in the season. Notre Dame played 10 power conference opponents, which matches anybody else. Despite not being in a conference, Notre Dame played 10 power conference opponents and Boise State and Navy, no FCS games. That's the one point that I don't think anybody brought up enough. I would have liked to have seen Pete Bavacqua bring it up Friday on the Pat McAfee show. I think it's important. I think it should have been driven home a little bit louder. Again, Notre Dame can't control the fact that Stanford was in a rebuild under Troy Taylor and had to fire him because of the way he was treating people in the office, according to various reports and documents that were filed. And it's not Notre Dame's fault that Purdue's been in basically a perpetual state of suck since Jeff Brom left. Those are still power conference teams that they schedule. It's not going to be Notre Dame's fault next year that Michigan State's going to be in year one under Pat Fitzgerald. It's scheduling these games. It's scheduling these teams. They are other power conference opponents that, in theory, have the same opportunity to be good or not good at football as Notre Dame, Drew.
Right. And to that point, like, they played that schedule and they beat all of those teams by 10 points. See, there wasn't a close game in any of those after the first two. Like, they handled everybody on their schedule. And it is significant that, like, I think there is this narrative, you've seen it from like Steve Sarkisian at Texas, where they try and drive home like, well, we're being punished for losing to Ohio State. But like, that's not the case. And I think until today, Notre Dame was a good example of that. Like, you're being punished for having a weak schedule or having weak games and then losing to those inferior opponents. Like Texas is punished because they lost to, I believe, a 5-7 Florida. Like those type of things mattered. Alabama was being punished until recently for losing to another 5-7 loss FSU team, and then conceivably getting blown out. So yeah, a lot of those narratives change, and I agree Notre Dame could have been done a better job of pushing back on that, because like I understand you want good wins to matter and head to head to matter, but also like bad losses should matter, because if you're putting teams in the CFP field and they're capable of such a poor play where they're not even going to be competitive, as we saw from Alabama last night, then that kind of defeats the purpose. Like you don't want all these blowouts in the playoffs. And I think Notre Dame played badly in its first 2 games. Like I think most people would agree that, even when Greg McElroy was talking about that, he mentioned that on ESPN, that Notre Dame didn't look like the team they are today. Notre Dame played badly and they lost by a combined 4 points. Like I think that is the type of thing you want in the field, because even if they're not on their A game, like they're still going to be competitive and put a good product on the field. And you've seen with Alabama, they're not necessarily going to do that. You see with Georgia, even how they played against Louisville and Miami, how they played against SMU and Louisville, like they cannot show up for games. Carson Beck in particular cannot show up for games, and it's totally possible he lays an egg against another good team, especially if his receivers aren't making spectacular catches like they did against Notre Dame.
Yeah, Ryan, I would think for sure that Notre Dame is furious with the ACC, particularly since Notre Dame, the ACC needs Notre Dame to help prop that league up as much as anything, because that's why the ACC is so invested in having Notre Dame playing Florida State, Miami, and Clemson even more. There have been murmurings that there could still be some conference dominoes to fall in the next couple of years, that the ACC is not completely out of the woods, so to speak, in terms of potential programs from that league still looking and entertaining offers to go elsewhere. That will certainly be worth monitoring. Yeah, you're certain that Notre Dame's furious. They've been furious because the ACC partners so heavily with Notre Dame in football, and then has Notre Dame as a member institution in so many other sports, including men's and women's basketball. And you can bet that when Notre Dame was doing some great things in men's basketball under Mike Bray, that the ACC was touting that. And certainly the ACC has touted Notre Dame women's basketball under Muffet McGraw, and more recently under Neil Ivey. So the ACC has set up this antagonistic situation for that relationship really out of no need. And what an ACC coach texted me as the brackets came out today is, quote, "Man, our league is so freaking stupid. There's so many scenarios out there. Miami and Notre Dame both deserve to be in. Miami should have been playing in our conference championship game, but our league is so messed up, we might end up seeing people playing one another in bowl games." So there you go. I think the ACC has a crisis of messaging, a crisis of leadership. I'll be very curious to see when Notre Dame has Marcus Freeman and Pete Bavacqua speak. Typically there is a bowl press conference, teleconference, Zoom, what have you, set up as soon as both teams are finalized into a bowl. I don't know if that's going to be Sunday evening that might take place this evening, or if that will be all the way until tomorrow. But that was the case a couple of years ago for the Sun Bowl, and before that it was the case for the Gator Bowl. But Dan Molyneux, 3672. I completely agree. I think it was politics. I think that politics ensured that the ACC would not get left out when Duke won that title game. And I had another coach from that league text me this morning, like, Duke winning is why Notre Dame's not in. And I think that's right. Had Virginia Tech handled business, Virginia handled business, then Virginia would have been the 11 seed. Tulane would have been the 12 seed, and Notre Dame would have held firm at the 10 seed. But there's no scenario where I will believe that the committee didn't discuss the ACC being entirely left out. It's too much interwoven into all of the things that you're looking at. And they said they rewatched the Notre Dame Miami game last night. They said that they stayed up till 2:30 in the morning, which is similar to the timeline they told us when we did the mock selection earlier this fall. So you can't look at that and not think that the ACC component did not factor into it. I'll never believe that the ACC component was not a major factor. And once Duke won that, an embarrassing Duke team that had 5 losses, including nearly getting blown out completely by UConn, also being very much handled by John Summerall's Tulane team in the season. Before then, Tulane turned around and went to Ole Miss the very next week and lost by around 30 points. And that is a very solid Tulane team. So that's kind of my final thoughts on it, Drew. Your final thoughts, not only on today's news, but just kind of this Notre Dame season in general. And again, the trajectory of the program moving forward, I still think is incredibly ascending.
Yeah, I think they have a lot of talent that could potentially come back next year. Again, as I said earlier, like getting this next month for whatever bowl game they're going to prepare and get younger guys involved. And, if you are without your running backs, like you're going to get a chance to potentially feature Aeneas Williams. Could that factor into him coming back and get some other guys like Nolan James involved and see what that looks like too. So there's definitely some significance there. I think we'll see if we've seen how Marcus Freeman, when their backs against the law and they're in what felt like this year must-win games for the last 10 games of the year, like what they do, and maybe some of that like pressure and motivation and whatever it is comes out a little sooner next year, just because they saw how little room for error there was this year, the way that the narrative kind of flipped on them as we got through the CFP rankings and stuff. So I kind of wonder if this is going to be some extra motivation for what should be a really talented potential preseason top 5 team next year anyways. Like, how are they going to come out of the gate with a game against Wisconsin after they, of course, get through this bowl game?
Yeah. Again, I completely agree. And again, nothing official, but the most discussed bowls involving scenarios for Notre Dame, Pop-Tart, and that's a different bowl than the Gator. So the Pop-Tart and the Gator, both in Florida, the Gator in Jacksonville, Pop-Tart in Orlando, and then the Holiday Bowl in San Diego. Those are the 3 that have been discussed on campus. Those are the 3 that we've heard the most. Again, a stunning, unexpected day. I felt that Notre Dame had proved its worthiness, a 10-game winning streak. Texas Tech was held up for winning all 11 of its games that it won this year going into Saturday by 20 or more points. It was said the one loss it had against Arizona State came without its starting quarterback, and then the Red Raiders stacked another double-digit 24-point win on top of things yesterday by eviscerating BYU. Notre Dame certainly dispatched all of its opponents with pretty much relative ease down the stretch. A 25-10 slumber at Boston College was a game where still the Fighting Irish were never threatened, but now we wait to see the bowl. We wait to see the future decisions of any number of players. But Notre Dame this week, I'll remind you, signed the highest-ranked recruiting class in the modern era, probably the most talent-laden recruiting class at Notre Dame since Lou Holtz just stockpiled talent from all over the country, and Notre Dame could have played for and potentially won a national championship 4 or 5 times in the late 80s into the early 90s. So there's still a lot to be positive about for this Notre Dame football program, but there's certainly understandable disappointment and frustration for all of you who have tuned into us faithfully 13 times this season, and I would imagine one more for a bowl game. We are greatly appreciative of that. And with that, we will sign off. For Drew Mentock of Irish Illustrated, for our producer extraordinaire, Tom Zwiller, I am John Brice of both FootballScoop and Irish Illustrated. This has been Irish Illustrated Overtime Live. Stay tuned to irishillustrated.com and footballscoop.com for updates on all the bowls, for updates on Notre Dame's plans, and for updates on what's going to be a massively important coming month for Notre Dame's roster future. Guys have some very difficult decisions. The transfer portal opens January 2nd. It runs through January 16th. Notre Dame has some needs during that time. Notre Dame also will probably have some guys that choose to pursue careers at another place. So until then, until our next time, I won't use my usual tagline saying until the next one. I hope you enjoyed this one, but I hope that we have provided some context to you on a disappointing day for Notre Dame. Thanks for tuning in.